The Archive of Borrowed Selves, a memoir in other minds, The Transference. Author's note, in character. I, Eli Weston, never intended to become the subject of my own story. Novelists, so we say, prefer the shadows. We watch, we listen, and we carve the shape of worlds from the raw block of reality. But experience had other plans for me. What follows is not just a narrative, but a confession, one that emerged from a sudden and radical shift in my own being. If identity is a riddle, then I have become its living question. Some have called this a detective story, others describe it as metaphysical science fiction. For me, it is simply the chronicle of how I was disassembled and reassembled into someone I barely recognized, all under the quest to cure a single relentless migraine. In that search, I discovered that the greatest puzzles lie not outside us, but within the chambers of the mind we call our own. I began writing in notebooks, on backs of napkins, in frantic scribbles on my phone. As my sense of self blurred and I inhabited the private thoughts of strangers, my only tether was language. The novel you hold is the culminating mosaic of all these shards, each piece gleaned from an empathy that once felt impossible. I have chosen to share every detail, every clue, every tremor of doubt, because the truth can only be glimpsed by shining a light on the fractured kaleidoscope of who we are and who we might have been. And now, to the story. Part 1. The needle behind the eye. The needle behind my left eye was how I described the onset of the migraines. I was 50 years old, touring Europe for my 7th novel, The Bridge Beyond Language, a literary mystery about a blind translator who solved crimes by reading the silences between words. Ironic, really, that I would soon confront a silence within my own mind, one so deep it frightened me more than any headache ever could. The migraine first struck in Amsterdam, in the middle of a signing event. I remember greeting a tall woman with braided hair, noticing how her eyes sparkled in a manner that suggested she had a story of her own to tell. Suddenly, a searing white light bored into my vision, and I toppled forward, crashing into the table. The crowd gasped. My publicist dabbed my forehead with a handkerchief. A paramedic, who'd been in line for a signature, helped me stumble to the back room. It was humiliating, but more than that, it was terrifying. In a single instant, my entire world had become a vice clamped around my skull. After that day, the migraines became a constant, a dull, throbbing presence that peaked at unpredictable moments. I consulted specialists in London, Berlin, and Prague. They prescribed triptans, beta blockers, meditation, dietary changes, and the usual admonishments about stress. None of it helped. I drank more water than I ever had in my life and tried various doping procedures I'm sure were borderline questionable. The migraines still came, unrelenting, more frequent with each passing month. It was in Zurich where I finally found something that might help, or so I was told. A friend of mine, a fellow novelist named Rebecca Johnson, recommended a certain clinic north of the city. "They do experimental treatments," she said on a late-night phone call, "but they've gotten me through chronic neuropathy from a spinal injury." Desperation had me packing my bags in under an hour. The facility was called the Neurological Institute for Cognitive Attunement, or NICA, which sounded to my untrained ear like a cross between a New Age retreat and a research lab. Indeed, upon arriving, I was greeted by meticulously trimmed hedges, glossy glass walls, and the hush of a place that wanted to disguise how expensive it was. The staff wore matching white uniforms without name tags, which unnerved me at first. Everyone looked so similar, so expressionless, like they shared some secret I had yet to learn. My primary caretaker was Dr. Lights, a man in his late 40s with steel-grey hair and a stare that penetrated. He asked me to sit in a plush chair in his office and recount the start, intensity, and triggers of my migraines. While I spoke, he tapped a stylus against a digital tablet, eyes rarely leaving my face. "You are an author, yes?" he asked at one point, with a polite Swiss-German accent. I nodded. "Your mind is no doubt rich in associations. That can be a double-edged sword." The recommended treatment was called cognitive neural attunement, CNA. Dr. Leitz explained, "We use electromagnetic pulses along specific neural pathways to reduce hyperactive connections. In many artistic individuals, the synergy that fuels creativity can also cause neurological overload. In essence, we are retuning your brain's default mode network." To me, it sounded like science fiction, but so did the idea that an entire building full of specialists had yet to fix me. The migraines were at a point where I would have tried anything. I signed a thick stack of waivers, disclaimers that this treatment was still in clinical trials, disclaimers that certain side effects might not be fully understood, disclaimers about possible liability. In the back of my mind, I heard alarm bells, but I chose to ignore them. The needle behind my eye was winning, rational caution was losing. I was instructed to fast for 18 hours before the procedure. On the morning of the treatment, a nurse took me to a windowless room lined with subdued lighting. Another nurse attached electrodes to my temples, scalp, and the back of my neck, each one feeling cold against my skin. They gave me a mild sedative, and the last thing I recall was Dr. Leitz whispering, "You will experience silence. Let it wash over you." The first thing I noticed upon waking was the absence of pain. Not just pain, any sensation in my head. It was as though someone had turned off all the static in the background, leaving only a quiet hum. My mind felt light, agile, unburdened. I had no recollection of the procedure itself, just a fleeting sense of having drifted in a dreamless sleep. I opened my eyes to see Doctor Light smiling, and despite my usual skepticism, I returned the smile. "My migraine?" I began. He tapped his stylus. "Gone?" he asked. I nodded. "Truly gone," I said in disbelief. They kept me for observation another night. I slept well, the first real restful sleep I'd had in years. No throbbing at 2 a.m., no stabbing behind the eyes at dawn. I felt euphoric as I checked out the following morning, a euphoria tempered only by the knowledge that migraines have a tendency to return. But I was willing to hope. Little did I know that the side effects from the disclaimers would soon unravel not just my migraines, but my entire notion of self. The next day, in a modest cafe in Bern, I would become someone else. Or rather, I would feel someone else. And the journey that began with a search for relief would spiral into a detective tale, a philosophical labyrinth, and a confrontation with the bare bones of personal identity. As I left Nika, I recall glancing back at the building, half expecting it to vanish or reveal some hidden dimension. It didn't. Everything looked normal. But normal, I was about to learn, can be the greatest illusion of all. It was nearly noon when my train arrived at Bern's Central Station. I decided to celebrate my newfound clarity by indulging in the best espresso in town. A quick phone search led me to a small place called Café Auréat, known for its unusual method of roasting beans in a gold-lined drum. Some marketing gimmick, I assumed, but the reviews were stellar. I navigated the winding streets until I found the place, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Bern's medieval charm never ceased to enchant me, even as I stepped inside a modern, minimalist interior. The barista greeted me with a shy smile, and I ordered a double espresso. I sat near the window, taking out my notebook, an old habit. Ideas always come easiest when I'm in motion or in new environments. My seventh novel had concluded with a sense of closure, and I'd been fishing around for the next big idea. The migraines had stifled my creativity, but now my mind felt open, pliant, ready. Maybe it was the euphoria or the novelty of painlessness, but I started scribbling about a character, an older woman who wore shoes one size too small simply because they reminded her of someone she lost. A random detail, but it felt promising. That was when I felt a sob building in my chest. I froze. I, personally, had no reason to cry. My mood was light, my body comfortable. Yet there it was, a wave of sorrow rising in my throat, prickling behind my eyes. I tried to swallow it, calm my breathing. It intensified. My hands trembled. I couldn't focus on my own writing. My entire being was consumed by this other sadness, so profound it hurt more than any migraine. I glanced around the cafe. Only 4 other customers were present. An older gentleman flipping through a newspaper, a teenage girl sipping a latte, a tourist couple, and a woman in her mid-30s wearing a red scarf. She was staring at a half-eaten pastry, tears welling in her eyes. Our eyes met, and the sob escaped my mouth. It wasn't mine. It was hers. I stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the table. Her sorrow filled me, an ocean of regret and guilt. Fragments of thought not my own flickered across my consciousness. I left him alone, just for an hour. What kind of mother does that? He's only 5. He still can't. I gasped, struggling to discern my own mind from whatever this was. The woman pressed the back of her hand to her lips, stifling her tears. I felt an urge to comfort her, to reassure her. Instead, I stumbled out the door, the espresso still steaming on the table. Outside, the crisp burn air slapped me awake. The strangled sob still resonated in my chest, but it was fading, like an echo. My heart pounded. What had happened to me? Was I hallucinating? Was this an anxiety attack? My first rational thought was side effects, the disclaimers. Could it be that the procedure had somehow opened a conduit in my brain, some extra sense? I paced along the street, eventually settling on a bench near the old clock tower. Writing used to be my therapy, so I pulled out my notebook and wrote one sentence. If empathy is the new omniscience, I am a god with 1,000 crucifixions. The melodrama of that sentence made me cringe, but it captured how I felt at that moment. I closed my notebook, determined to figure out what was happening to me. I told myself it was a freak occurrence, a mental glitch, but deep down, I knew it was just the beginning. I needed a distraction, so I spent the afternoon wandering Bern, visiting the bookstore next to the cafe. I perused the shelves, reminding myself I was still me. My reflection in the glass door looked the same. Dark hair streaked with silver, tired eyes, a face that had seen a few too many cities in too little time. No one around me seemed unsettled. The world was normal, and yet I felt unmoored. That night, in my hotel room, the memory of the woman's grief gnawed at me. I sensed that if I allowed it, the sorrow would come flooding back. Instead, I tried to recast it into fiction, writing a short monologue for an unnamed woman who regrets leaving her child alone. The catharsis was partial, but it helped me realize I needed to test this ability. If it was real, it would happen again, under certain conditions, conditions I might reproduce or at least observe. My years as a novelist had honed my sense of curiosity, my drive to investigate the unexplained. Now, ironically, I was the mystery. Morning came, and with it, a strange resolution. I decided to visit Zurich Hauptbahnhof, one of the busiest train stations in Europe, and see if the swirling masses of humanity triggered anything. It was a risky gamble, but I was desperate to understand. I arrived in the late morning. The station was thrumming with life, travelers hauling luggage, commuters rushing to catch trains, street musicians serenading passers-by for spare coins. The vaulted ceilings and the echo of voices reminded me of a cathedral. I walked slowly, weaving through the crowd, trying to keep my senses open. Every so often, I paused and made eye contact with someone hurrying past. I felt nothing unusual, just my own mild apprehension. Then I saw him. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, dark hair, wearing clothes that seemed a size too large. He was hawking roses to couples, which I suspected was unlicensed. His gaze swept over the crowd like a watchful predator or a desperate hawk searching for prey. He spotted me, and his eyes narrowed. I braced myself as he approached. "Roses?" he asked in broken German. 1 rose, 2 francs. I didn't actually want a rose, but something about him compelled me to say, sure. As I reached for my wallet, our eyes locked, and the wave of emotion hit me. Hunger. Real, clawing hunger, a gnawing pit in the stomach, a memory of drowning, cold water filling the lungs, a father's voice screaming, a rage so potent it made my vision blur. I staggered back, and the boy, alarmed, took a step away. My heart thudded. My mind reeled with images of a child pinned under water, a father's hand pressing him down, or maybe it was an accident. I couldn't tell. I only felt terror and anger fused into one monstrous knot. By reflex, I pressed a 10-franc note into the boy's hand, forgetting the rose. He eyed the money, then me, and darted off. In the aftermath, a shiver ran through my body. I stood there, breathing heavily, the crowd parting around me as though I were a stone in a stream. Again, I had touched something deeply private, and the residue of that boy's emotions lingered far longer than the woman's sorrow had. That evening, I wrote a short piece about a child born under water and raised in silence, whose father demanded he learn to hold his breath for inhuman lengths of time. I poured in the sense of dread, the rage, the watery nightmares. When I finished, my hands were shaking. I recognized this was not normal empathy. I wasn't just imagining what it felt like to be that boy. I was tasting it, living it, fleetingly, but powerfully. Was I becoming a conduit for other minds? The next morning, I woke with an idea for a story that integrated both the woman in the red scarf and the drowning boy, two threads of empathic invasion that wouldn't let me go. It was as if each empathic event formed the seed of a new narrative. That story, which I tentatively titled Oceans of Guilt, eventually won a minor literary award in a Swiss short fiction contest. But at the time, I felt no sense of celebration. I was consumed by one question: why me? Over the next weeks, I tested my newfound ability in small increments: restaurants, parks, hotel lobbies, aware of the risk that I might be intruding on emotions far darker than I could handle. I felt as if I was reading other people's diaries without permission. With each empathic episode, the migraines seemed more distant, an afterthought, replaced by a creeping concern that I was some sort of unwitting psychic. I returned to Nika, demanded explanations. Dr. Lights only raised an eyebrow. "The procedure does not grant psychic powers, Mr. Weston," he said. "Perhaps your mind is discovering an unusual channel of empathy, but we have no reason to believe it's permanent." Permanent or not, it was drastically changing my life. I cancelled the remainder of my book tour, claiming health issues, which wasn't entirely untrue. In truth, I was afraid that the next handshake, the next intense moment of eye contact, would thrust me into someone else's living nightmare. Yet, part of me was also electrified, curious. This was a fountain of raw human experience, the kind that writers yearn for but can only approximate in their imaginations. Now I had direct access. It felt both exhilarating and morally troubling. After all, these people had never consented to have their pain or secrets shared. That conflict reached a head in Bali, a place I visited on a whim after receiving a surprise invitation to speak at a literary festival. I hoped the tranquil environment might give me space to sort out what was happening. Instead, I found Leon, the monk who hated the stars, and everything I thought I knew about knowledge crumbled. Part 2. The Monk Who Hated the Stars. I'd been invited to the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival to give a talk on global narratives and the modern imagination. My migraines were gone, replaced with the fear of empathic overload. Yet, the festival's energy was contagious. Authors from around the globe mingled under palm trees, discussing everything from climate change to classical poetry. For a moment, it felt like I could be normal again. But on the second evening, I attended an off-program event at a local temple where guests could participate in a cultural exchange. There, sitting on a woven mat under a canopy of stars, I met Leon. He wore simple monk's robes and exuded a calm, measured presence. The festival organizer introduced him as a Buddhist teacher who also once had a career in astrophysics. That piqued my interest. When I asked Leon about his background, he merely smiled. "I prefer not to talk about it," he said quietly. Something in his demeanor suggested a deep reservoir of pain carefully concealed. We sat together, sipping tea, surrounded by the low murmur of conversation. When the night sky revealed itself in all its tropical brilliance, I noticed Leon kept his gaze firmly on the ground. Most of the other festival-goers were craning their necks, marveling at the Milky Way. "Don't you want to look?" I asked, meaning no harm. He grimaced. "I've seen enough," he whispered. Curiosity got the better of me. I gently probed. "What exactly did you see?" "As an astrophysicist, I mean." His face tightened. "That nothing is constant," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Light, time, matter, illusions we cling to." I realized I was devoting my life to measuring illusions. The more I discovered, the more hopeless I felt. So I left. I came here. I teach children now. I do not need to look up. Later that evening, I found him alone by a small altar, lighting incense. His shoulders were hunched, as though an invisible weight pressed down on him. And in that moment, my empathic sense awakened, bridging our gazes. A torrent of mental images washed over me. A massive telescope under a cold, clear sky, equations scribbled in frantic bursts on a blackboard, an existential dread at the cosmic emptiness, a personal tragedy overshadowed by the knowledge that none of it truly mattered. The scale of the universe mocked him. He felt suffocated by the infinite. My legs nearly gave out. I grabbed a wooden post to steady myself. Lian saw my distress and rushed forward. "Are you all right?" he asked, a note of concern in his voice. I nodded mutely, trying to catch my breath. His sorrow was unlike the boy's or the woman's. It was cosmic in scope, a despair that encompassed not just personal suffering, but the weight of understanding too much. For a moment, I felt the cold vacuum of interstellar space pressing on my psyche. He noticed my reaction. "You sense it too?" he asked quietly. I didn't know how to respond, but I nodded. I wasn't sure if he believed in psychic phenomena or empathic connections, but he seemed unsurprised. With a weary sigh, he said, "Knowledge can break us. That's why I left my old life behind." The next day, after my talk at the festival, I found Lian teaching a group of local children to fold origami cranes. The giggles of the children contrasted sharply with the gravity of his confession the night before. I sat on a wooden bench, observing how gently he guided their hands. When the lesson ended, he invited me to his small living quarters in the temple compound. There, over cups of tea, Leon spoke more freely. He recounted his years in a prestigious astrophysics program, his early excitement at deciphering the cosmos, and the pivotal night when he observed distant galaxies shifting in ways that contradicted established scientific theories. "It sounds dramatic, but it was as though the universe itself laughed at me," he explained. The data implied that cosmic constants might not be constant at all, that everything we rely on, speed of light, cosmic background radiation, could shift under conditions we barely understand. It undermined the bedrock of physics. I felt unmoored, terrified. I asked myself, if the laws of the universe are not fixed, what else is uncertain? He paused to refill our teacups. "At first, I thought I could handle it intellectually," he said. "But soon, it bled into my personal life. My relationships felt arbitrary. My sense of purpose evaporated. I couldn't sleep, couldn't work. The more I learned, the more ephemeral everything became. I ended up here, seeking a spiritual grounding to counter the vertigo of cosmic flux." I listened intently, trying not to let my empathy consume me again. Even so, echoes of his existential fear lingered in my thoughts. I recognized that fear on a smaller scale. Writers often grapple with the meaning of existence, but Lian's was magnified by scientific evidence. "So you avoid the stars?" I murmured. He nodded. "Yes. It's my small rebellion, my fragile acceptance. I look at the earth, the children, the daily tasks. That is my universe now. I do not need to be reminded of the scale beyond that. At that moment, I realized how my own ability mirrored a cosmic horror. If I could truly absorb the experiences of others, then identity itself could shift like those cosmic constants, never fixed, always at the mercy of the next empathic exchange. I wondered if I, too, would end up fleeing from knowledge, from connection, because it was too overwhelming. A day later, I wrote a short story titled The Astronomer's Confession, about a scientist who hears the stars whisper secrets too vast for the human mind. The protagonist tries to warn humanity that the cosmos is not stable, but no one believes him. In the end, he retreats to a remote monastery, where he stares at the ground each night, haunted by memories of cosmic laughter. I included the sense of dread, the quiet heartbreak, and the flicker of hope that maybe simple human kindness was enough to stand against the infinite. The story became an online sensation, shared widely for its philosophical depth and eerie atmosphere. But as with each empathic encounter, my interest in public reception was negligible. I felt like a vessel, carrying the experiences of others, shaping them into fiction. My sense of self grew blurrier. Was I still just Eli Weston, or was I also the sorrowful mother, the drowning child, the astrophysicist turned monk? Each time I carried a trace of them forward, as though they'd taken up permanent residence in my psyche. My migraines were gone, replaced by a new form of torment, the knowledge that I could become a conduit for an endless array of human sorrows, regrets, fears, and joys. Part of me wondered if I could also tap into the positive emotions, love, triumph, peace. Yet so far, each empathic episode had been dominated by negative or intense emotions. Could it be that only pain was strong enough to bridge the gap? Searching for answers, I found myself drawn to an underground gathering in Morocco, a secretive group rumored to consist of individuals with unusual mental abilities. The invitation came through an obscure online forum. The poster claimed it was a council of others, a monthly symposium for sharing experiences beyond the norm. The mention of empathic phenomena caught my attention instantly, and so I embarked on another journey, in the hopes of finding others who could help me navigate this gift or curse. Part 3. The Council of Others. I arrived in Marrakesh on a sweltering day. The pink-hued buildings seemed to shimmer under the midday sun. Voices in French, Arabic, English, and Berber mingled in the bustling streets. The directions I'd been given led me through a maze of alleys, past spice vendors and fortune-tellers, until I reached a modest wooden door set into a high wall. A discreet sign above it, barely visible, read Dar el Nada. A single knock. The door opened a crack, revealing a narrow-eyed man who studied me before letting me in. Inside was a cool courtyard with mosaic tiles and potted orange trees. About a dozen people stood or sat in hushed conversation. The moment I entered, a few of them glanced my way, their expressions curious, but not surprised. It was as if they'd been expecting me. A woman approached. She wore a flowing white robe and introduced herself as Dr. Parnell. I guessed she was in her mid-50s, with graying hair coiled in a loose bun. "Welcome to the council," she said, leading me to a shaded corner. "We don't keep formal records, but we do have a tradition of sharing experiences. Please, tell me how you found us." I gave her a brief account of my migraines, the Swiss clinic, the empathic episodes. She nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, we've heard of the NICA trials. You're not the first." That raised my eyebrows. "So there are others with, what, empathic ability?" I asked. "Empathy, telepathy, illusions of time distortion. It varies," she replied. "But the underlying theme is a rewiring of the brain's neural networks in unusual patterns." She gestured for me to join a small circle of attendees. Each person had a story. One man from Warsaw described how, after a near-death experience, he could sense architectural imperfections in any building he entered, as though the walls whispered structural secrets. A soft-spoken Spanish woman claimed to see people's childhood traumas as ghostly silhouettes hovering near them. But Dr. Parnell's own confession startled me most. She could feel the moment of death of anyone within a 100-meter radius. She described it as a pressure change, like a dropping barometer, accompanied by a momentary flash of the dying person's last emotion: fear, relief, surprise. It began after I was struck by lightning, she explained calmly. Now, every time someone within that range passes, I sense it. The stories exchanged that evening were a tapestry of the extraordinary. We gathered around low tables laden with mint tea and sweet pastries, reminiscent of an academic salon, but with an undercurrent of awe and dread. Some joked about forming a superhero league, but the laughter was tinged with irony. Most of us carried these abilities more as burdens than blessings. When it was my turn, I spoke of how each empathic episode ambushed me whenever I locked eyes with someone experiencing intense emotion. It's more than just feeling what they feel, I explained, voice trembling slightly. I remember their experiences: the child drowning, the astrophysicist's cosmic despair. These are not fantasies. They haunt me like my own memories. Dr. Parnell regarded me kindly. We call that sensory memory overlap. It's powerful, and it can erode one's sense of identity. But it can also be harnessed. Have you tried any form of self-regulation or controlled environment training? She suggested techniques akin to meditative focus or cognitive behavioral therapy for psionic phenomena. It all sounded surreal, but I was willing to try anything. Another member of the council, a middle-aged man named Hitoshi, asked a pointed question. Have you considered whether you can reverse it? Instead of receiving others' memories, perhaps you can project your own. This possibility had never occurred to me. The idea of forcing someone else to feel what I felt seemed unethical, horrifying even. But the seed was planted. If empathy was a two-way street, what then? For the next few days, I participated in small workshops at Dar el Nahda, focusing on mental boundaries and guided visualization. We would sit in pairs, attempting to share minor sensations, such as the texture of a piece of fruit or the warmth of sunlight. I struggled mightily to keep my mind distinct, to avoid plunging into the other's psyche. Despite these efforts, or perhaps because of them, I discovered that my ability thrived on emotional intensity. Without that deep surge of feeling, the channel remained mostly closed. One evening, near midnight, Dr. Parnell pulled me aside. Eli, there's someone else here I think you should speak to. She came to the council a few months ago with a situation almost identical to yours, though not triggered by migraines. She said it was an experimental therapy for chronic fatigue. She's been exploring the next phase of empathic connection, something we call full transference. I felt a chill. Full transference sounded ominous, but also like an answer to a question I didn't yet know how to ask. I waited in a corner of the courtyard, listening to the fountain's gentle trickle, until Dr. Parnell returned with a woman in her early 30s. She introduced herself as Sophia. Her bright eyes and confident posture contrasted with the nervous energy in her hands, which twisted the hem of her blouse. "I've heard of you," she said, smiling politely. "You're the novelist?" "Yes," I replied, feeling oddly self-conscious. "I write?" She laughed. "Don't be modest. I read your short story about the drowning boy. It was haunting." So she recognized me from my work, which meant some part of my empathic experiences was already out in the public domain, albeit fictionalized. We found a quiet spot beneath an orange tree, the scent of citrus mixing with the night air. Sophia explained her own journey. She'd received a therapy in Belgium to combat severe chronic fatigue, using a technique that supposedly restructured her brain's energy regulation. Soon after, she discovered she could step into another person's consciousness if they were in a heightened emotional state. "But I didn't just feel them," she said. "I became them, at least for a short time. That's full transference." She recounted a dramatic incident. While comforting a close friend who had just lost her father, Sophia found herself slipping away from her own body. For a few moments, she was inside her friend's mind, seeing memories of a distant childhood, feeling grief that threatened to break her heart. When she snapped back to herself, she momentarily forgot who she was. disoriented by the swirl of another's identity. "It took me days to recover," she said, voice quivering slightly at the memory. "That's terrifying," I breathed, "but also unbelievably profound." She nodded. "Exactly. It changed how I see the world, how I see people. If you can literally be someone else, even briefly, then what are we? At our core." That was the question that had been gnawing at me. If identity is so permeable, is there a fundamental self beneath the borrowed experiences? Or are we just aggregates of memories waiting to be rearranged? Sophia offered to guide me through an attempt at full transference under controlled conditions. The idea frightened me, but the writer in me couldn't resist the chance to discover a deeper truth about this ability. The following night, we convened in a private room lit by a single lamp. A few council members, including Dr. Parnell, supervised. Sophia and I sat face to face, our knees almost touching, each with an electrode attached to measure basic physiological responses, pulse, brain waves. The goal was for her to evoke a powerful emotional memory and for me to follow that empathic current. We practiced calming breaths, aligned our gazes, and waited. Sophia closed her eyes, recalling a day of heartbreak, the moment she realized her marriage was over. The memory swelled with sadness, anger, and a bittersweet sense of liberation. I felt it roiling in my chest, beckoning me. I focused on her eyes, her breath, the slightest tension in her shoulders. Then something inside me lurched, like a heavy door swinging open in my mind. I felt myself slip through that doorway. In an instant, I was not in my chair. I was in a modest apartment, the scent of lavender and stale coffee in the air. A photograph of two smiling faces lay smashed on the floor. "I remember that day," a voice in my head said, though it wasn't my voice. I was Sophia, pacing the apartment, tears streaming down my face. The grief gnawed at me, but beneath it was a surprising surge of relief. I'm free, I thought, or she thought. Time blurred. After an indeterminate span, I felt a tug, a falling sensation. My eyes snapped open. I was back in the lamplit room, trembling. My cheeks were wet with tears. Sophia sat across from me, also trembling, her eyes wide with shock. Dr. Parnell rushed to check our pulses. "You both blanked out for about a minute," she said, her voice tight with concern. My mind reeled. For that minute, I had forgotten being Eli Weston. I had become Sophia, with her memories, her perspective, her emotional tapestry. It wasn't just empathy, it was identity transference. The possibility left me breathless and, if I'm honest, a bit afraid. If this could happen accidentally in daily life, how would I ever remain myself? Sophia and I spent hours afterward talking, trying to piece together the phenomenon. "It's like crossing the Rubicon," she said. "Once you fully become someone else, you realize how tenuous your own self is." A look of sadness crossed her face. "I've done it a few times now, and each time I return a little more fragmented, a little less certain of who Sophia really is. I'm learning to piece myself back together with meditation and journaling, but it's a struggle." Before I departed Morocco, Dr. Parnell handed me a slip of paper with some recommended psychiatrists and spiritual mentors, people who specialized in guiding individuals through extreme empathy events. I thanked her, though I wasn't sure if I would ever seek them out. Part of me wanted to bury this ability, to run from it. But another part saw a goldmine of human stories, experiences so genuine that fiction paled in comparison. Little did I know that the path ahead would combine both impulses, the desire for self-preservation and the hunger for narrative truth. I left the council with new insight and a heavy heart. If my empathic gift was a window, full transference was a door that swung both ways, risking the dissolution of my own identity in the process. Yet, the next natural step for a novelist like me was obvious: harness these experiences into a narrative. And so, the seeds for my new project began to germinate, a dystopian story about a future where experiences themselves became tradable commodities. By writing it, I hope to exorcise, or at least articulate, the spectre of identity's fragility. The next stage of my journey took me to Lisbon, where I would test the boundaries of full transference under even more clandestine circumstances. And in that Portuguese basement, I caught a glimpse of the darkest side of empathy, the power it had to consume and exploit. Part 4.
Trial by inhabitation.
In Lisbon, I rented a small apartment in the Alfama district, a maze of narrow streets lined with pastel buildings and the faint sound of fado music drifting from tavern windows. Ostensibly, I was there for research, but in truth, I was simply following the trail of an acquaintance I had met in Morocco, an architect from Warsaw named Tomasz, who claimed to know a group that conducted deep empathy experiments. The location: a basement in an abandoned building near the port. I admit I was apprehensive. My last foray into empathy exploration under controlled conditions left me shaken. But some inexorable curiosity drove me on, perhaps the same impulse that compels detectives to chase leads even when the leads are dangerous. My nights were sleepless. I'd walk Alfama's cobbled streets, imagining the centuries of stories whispered in each archway, waiting for the designated day when Tomasz would call. Finally, the call came. We met at a small cafe near the Portas do Sol viewpoint, where tourists snapped photos of the city's terracotta rooftops. Tomasz was a wiry man with restless eyes. He fiddled constantly with a pen as we spoke. "You're sure you want this?" he asked, in a hushed tone. "I'm not entirely comfortable myself, but the group believes in pushing boundaries." I nodded. "I need to know what's possible." At dusk, we made our way to a decrepit industrial building by the waterfront, peeling paint, broken windows, the stench of salt and rust in the air. A side door led to a concrete stairwell descending into darkness. With every step, my pulse quickened, a primal sense of danger building in my gut. Eventually, we reached a large basement room lit by a single hanging lamp. A makeshift table stood at the center, cluttered with cables, monitors, and what looked like repurposed medical equipment. 3 people waited: an older woman with piercing grey eyes, a tall man who paced nervously, and a younger woman who introduced herself as Sophia, though not the same Sophia I'd met in Morocco. "We're exploring the frontiers of shared consciousness," the older woman said, her voice carrying an air of authority. She motioned to a row of chairs. "Each session pushes us further into the phenomenon we call inhabitation. It goes beyond transference. Not only do you become someone else, you can remain there, controlling that body for a time." I felt a tremor of revulsion. Controlling another's body? This was a step too far, ethically and existentially. But she continued, "In these sessions, we use EEG synchronization and deep hypnotic suggestion to facilitate the switch. We believe it's the next evolution of empathy." The tall man, apparently anxious, blurted out, "Some call it identity theft, but we see it as consensual exploration." His nervous chuckle did little to reassure me. Tomasz squeezed my shoulder. "They know what they're doing," he said, but there was a tremor in his voice. The older woman, who introduced herself as Doctor Milena, offered me a seat. "Would you like to observe first?" she asked. I nodded, wanting to gauge the process before deciding if I'd actually participate. The younger woman, Sophia, volunteered as the subject. She slipped into a chair facing the tall man, whose name turned out to be João. Electrodes were placed on their temples, a pulse monitor on each wrist. Dr. Milena adjusted dials on a control box that pulsed with a low hum. "Now, focus on your breathing. Align it with each other," she instructed. Slowly, their inhalations and exhalations synced. A red LED blinked in tandem with their heartbeats. Sophia recalled a memory of intense fear. She'd been mugged at knife point years ago. As she spoke, João seemed to tense, his pupils dilating. Then it happened. He slumped forward for a second, only to straighten up with a startled gasp. His posture changed. His eyes searched the room. Meanwhile, Sophia's head lolled, as if she were in a trance. "Where?" João started, then looked at his hands. "These aren't my—" He trailed off, a flicker of panic in his voice. Dr. Milena quickly placed a hand on his shoulder. Stay calm. Keep breathing. For a moment, it appeared as if Joanne was speaking in a different cadence, eyes wide with disorientation. The tension was palpable, as if the air had thickened. After about 30 seconds, Sophia jolted upright, and João exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. Their gazes broke, the electrodes beeped in alarm, and Dr. Milena switched off the machine. The entire exchange couldn't have lasted more than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. That was an unsteady link, Dr. Milena said, matter-of-factly. We'll keep practicing. I was both horrified and fascinated. This wasn't just empathy or momentary transference. It looked more like soul-swapping. But was it genuine, or some form of elaborate psychosomatic trick? Either possibility rattled me. The question hammered in my mind. Could I do that? A part of me recoiled at the thought of stepping so deeply into someone else's reality that I would momentarily forget my own body. I must have been visibly disturbed because Dr. Milena approached me, offering a measured smile. You're not obligated to try, she said. But for someone like you, who already has a strong empathic channel, it might be more seamless. I shook my head. I just wanted to learn, I replied weakly. I'm not sure I'm ready. Over the next hour, I watched more attempts. Some sessions were brief, others more sustained. Each time, the host ended up shaken, sometimes exhilarated, sometimes tearful. Dr. Milena meticulously recorded data, EEG patterns, heart rate fluctuations, the subject's recollections. It felt like a clandestine laboratory, pushing ethical lines. Yet everyone there was a volunteer, apparently convinced of the potential spiritual or psychological breakthroughs. In a lull between sessions, Tomasz whispered to me, It's mesmerizing, isn't it? The idea of truly being someone else, not just in mind, but in the driver's seat. He sounded more intrigued than repulsed. I wondered if he planned to attempt it himself. My mind drifted back to the disclaimers I'd signed at Nika, the warnings that unanticipated neurological effects could occur. This was surely not what they had in mind, or maybe it was. Finally, I found the courage to approach Dr. Milena. If I do this, can you promise I'll come back to myself? She paused, measuring her words. We have never lost anyone, but the experience can be disorienting. The bond relies on emotional intensity, so we encourage focusing on strong, yet not overwhelmingly traumatic memories. She gestured to Sophia, who was sipping water. If you want a partner, Sophia is quite adept at guiding newcomers. My palms sweat, my throat felt dry. But I nodded. I reminded myself I was a detective of the human psyche, that this was my chance to glean some final puzzle piece about the nature of identity. The setup took only a few minutes. The electrodes, the seat placement, the instructions to sync breathing. My partner, Sophia, gave me a reassuring smile. Don't force it, she said softly. Just let it happen if it wants to. We began. I inhaled, exhaled, matching Sophia's rhythm. She recalled a memory of quiet joy, the day she swam with dolphins in the Azores. I caught glimpses of salt water, gentle fins slicing the waves, a sense of wonder. I felt my body relaxing, but nothing dramatic happened. Dr. Milena nodded, flipping switches, adjusting the machine's frequency. Sophia shifted to a deeper memory, her father's funeral, the moment she saw him in the casket. A surge of grief, regret, love, confusion. My heartbeat quickened, sweat beading on my forehead. The room seemed to dim. My vision tunneled onto Sophia's eyes, which glistened with tears. Then, as if stepping off a cliff in a dream, I fell forward. The next instant, I felt, not my body. My vantage point had shifted. I was staring at a closed coffin, the strong smell of incense in the air. A man's voice was speaking in Portuguese, eulogizing. My own hands, Sophia's hands, were trembling, clutching a rosary. My heart hammered with the pain of loss, conflicting with the swirl of other thoughts. He wasn't always kind to me, the inner voice said, but he was my father. A wave of dizziness hit me. In that moment, I realized I'd stepped completely into her memory. Or maybe it was more than memory. It felt like an active presence. I grieved, tears sliding down my cheeks, her cheeks. This was a pain and love so intimate that I lost track of my own identity. Then, a bright flash and a jolt. Someone calling my name, my real name. Eli. I blinked hard, staring into the basement room's dim light. Sophia sat across from me, her face a mirror of my shock. Dr. Milena checked our vitals while Tomasz hovered anxiously. I touched my face, half expecting to feel tears. It was dry, yet inside I still felt the echo of funeral incense and paternal heartbreak. It took me a few minutes to orient myself, to remember that I was Eli Weston. A slow wave of relief and terror washed over me. I declined another session that night. My nerves were frayed, and I had no desire to push further. Sophia seemed equally drained. We parted with a shared understanding that we'd touched something profound and risky. If empathy was a door, we'd flung it open a crack, enough to glimpse the swirling chaos of identity swirling beyond. Despite the shock, I couldn't sleep. Back at my apartment, I paced for hours, replaying the experience in my head, sifting through the kaleidoscope of thoughts that weren't mine. Around 3 in the morning, I started writing. Words flowed, describing a hypothetical future in which people sold or bought experiences like contraband. The idea took shape quickly. In a world without currency, experience itself became the most valuable commodity. Those who had rich, intense memories could barter them for power. The ethically unscrupulous might forcibly extract experiences from the vulnerable. I envisioned an entire subculture addicted to second-hand traumas and stolen joys. My story's protagonist would be a detective investigating black market memory trades. It felt urgent, real, and terrifyingly plausible. 2 nights later, Tomasz visited my apartment. Over a cheap bottle of wine, he asked, "So, was it worth it?" I answered honestly, "Yes, but it's changed me. I'm not sure I can write about people the same way anymore, knowing how malleable identity truly is." He nodded. "We're living in an age where the boundaries between minds are dissolving, technologically or otherwise. You're just getting an advance preview." By the time I left Lisbon, I had the outline of a new novel in progress, tentatively titled The Book of Lived Coins. Each chapter would revolve around characters who traded, hoarded, or lost experiences in a post-currency world. My personal empathic episodes would weave into the plot as fictional vignettes. I intended the novel as both a cautionary tale and a reflection of the wonders and terrors I'd encountered. Little did I know how deeply it would resonate and how intimately it would tie into my final transformation. Part 5. The Book of Lived Coins. I spent the next 6 months in near seclusion, writing feverishly. I holed up in my London flat, rarely venturing outside except for groceries or the occasional walk by the Thames. My empathic ability had become both impetus and threat. I feared chance encounters in public might pull me into yet another stranger's trauma. So, I channeled my energies into fiction, weaving together all I had experienced into a sprawling narrative. The Book of Lived Coins took shape as a future dystopia. In this world, traditional currency was abolished after a global economic collapse. In its place, an institution known as the empathic bank arose, storing and trading lived coins, distilled experiences, complete with their emotional resonance. People could deposit memories of love, sorrow, triumph, or fear, receiving credit to use for basic goods. The more intense or rare the experience, the higher its value. Traumatic memories fetched a premium because they were so vivid. Joyful ones were in shorter supply, ironically making them even more priceless. My protagonist, Detective Malcolm Reed, worked for the Empathic Bank's security division. His role was to investigate illegal trades, black market rings that stole or fabricated experiences. The moral quandary: these experiences could be re-uploaded into paying clients, granting them the rush of living someone else's joys or horrors without consequences. As my plot thickened, I introduced multiple sub-narratives, each paralleling one of my real-life empathic episodes. In one chapter, a mother sells her memories of her only child's infancy to pay for food. After the transaction, she no longer recalls that her son was once a helpless infant in her arms. She loves him still, but feels a strange distance. In another chapter, a disgraced astrophysicist tries to warn society that the entire system is destabilizing human identity. Once we can be anyone, what anchors the self? And in a particularly disturbing storyline, a child's memory of near drowning becomes a coveted commodity among thrill seekers who get off on the adrenaline of mortal terror. Meanwhile, Detective Reed grapples with the discovery that his wife, whom he thought he knew intimately, has sold or traded half of her pivotal life experiences. She's a stranger in the same bed, lacking the memories of their first date, her college years, even her mother's funeral. He tries to uncover her motivations, only to realize she might be part of an extremist group determined to collapse the empathic bank from within. As I wrote these arcs, I felt an uncanny sense that I was channeling not just my imagination, but the very real energies I'd absorbed through my empathic encounters. The words poured out, sometimes in dreamlike frenzies. I'd wake at night, rewriting entire chapters to better capture the feeling of living in someone else's mind. My editor, Joel, read the first few drafts and was stunned. "This is unlike anything you've written before," he said over a video call. "It's raw, disconcerting, and absolutely gripping." Toward the final chapters, Detective Reed pursues a lead into the dark underbelly of the black market, discovering that the real danger isn't just stolen experiences, it's the potential for permanent transference. If technology can record and implant experiences, it can also override a person's core identity, leaving them a husk inhabited by someone else's consciousness. The threat is existential, the erasure of the self. While writing these scenes, I was acutely aware that I was dramatizing something I'd already glimpsed in Lisbon's basement. Could my own empathic gift be harnessed or misused in similar ways? The ethical questions loomed. Ultimately, I gave the novel a bittersweet ending. Detective Reed dismantles part of the black market, but at great personal cost. His wife disappears into the system, trading away her last recollections of him. Reed stands alone, uncertain if the love they shared was even real, or simply a memory traded like coin. When I typed the final sentence, "In the vault of shared minds, we are all beggars of borrowed ghosts," I felt a shiver of catharsis. I'd confronted the darkest corners of this new empathy. The manuscript ran nearly 600 pages. Joel submitted it to my publisher, who promptly hailed it as my magnum opus. Preparations for the global launch began almost immediately. Word spread quickly in literary circles. Critics who saw early proofs praised its originality and moral complexity. My publicist arranged a high-profile launch party in Paris, set to coincide with a major literary festival. Invitations went out to a who's who of authors, journalists, and cultural figures. For me, the moment felt surreal. My empathic condition, once a private terror, had birthed a novel that now threatened to overshadow anything I'd written before. Yet, as the launch date approached, I found myself uneasy. All the writing and revision had been a safe, solitary endeavor. Now, I'd be thrust back into the public eye, where a single glance at someone in distress could trigger another wave of psychic infiltration. I stocked up on sunglasses, scarves, anything to avoid direct eye contact. It felt ridiculous, but after my experiences, I wasn't taking chances. I arrived in Paris a week before the event, checking into a boutique hotel near the Place Vendôme. The city sparkled with autumn vibrancy, golden leaves drifting down the boulevards. I spent the days pacing my room, practicing the mental barriers Dr. Parnell had taught me. As the day of the launch party approached, I repeated a mantra under my breath. I am Eli Weston. I am here. I am real. I needed that reminder more than ever. The party was held at a lavish gallery space in the Marais district. Velvet drapes, crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes balanced on silver trays. Photographers snapped pictures as soon as I stepped out of the car. My publisher, flanked by PR staff, whisked me inside, where a crowd of well-dressed attendees sipped cocktails and chatted about the novel in hushed, excited tones. I forced a smile, making small talk with colleagues and fans. My nerves jangled each time someone looked deeply into my eyes, but the mental barrier held, mostly. I avoided sustaining eye contact for more than a second or two. Even so, I felt a faint, muffled echo of emotions here and there. Someone's anxiety about a job interview, someone else's heartbreak over an unrequited love. None of it overwhelmed me, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps I'd learned to manage this after all. Midway through the evening, I found myself on stage beside my editor, giving a short speech about the inspiration behind the Book of Lived Coins. I tried to be vague, attributing my ideas to intense personal experiences and reflections on empathy. The crowd listened raptly. A reporter asked if the novel was meant as a warning against technology. I sidestepped, explaining it was more a meditation on the fragility of identity. Then came the question. Mr. Weston, do you believe that personal identity is fixed or malleable? My heart pounded. The old question. The question that had followed me since the day my migraines disappeared. I paused, scanning the faces in the audience. They waited, phones out, ready to capture my words. Finally, I said, I think identity is a series of accidents and attachments, layered over time. We cling to it, but it can shift, break, or even be stolen. Perhaps that's our greatest vulnerability and our greatest hope. Polite applause followed, but I sensed something deeper stirring in the audience, a ripple of concern or fascination. I concluded my remarks by quoting Pessoa, a nod to the Portuguese dimension of my journey. To be everything is to be nothing. Some recognized the reference, and the applause swelled again. My publicist ushered me down from the stage, praising the speech. I felt only relief that I hadn't dissolved into someone else mid-sentence. By midnight, the crowd began to thin. A few stragglers lingered, discussing the novel, praising its originality or questioning its bleakness. I snuck out through a side entrance into a quiet Paris street. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and car exhaust. I leaned against a lamppost, letting the tension seep out of me. That was when I saw her, a woman in a black coat, standing a few meters away, shoulders trembling as she dabbed tears from her eyes. Instinctively, I averted my gaze, but a wave of empathy still nudged the edges of my mind. Should I approach, risk connecting, or should I leave her alone? Torn between fear and compassion, I hesitated. In the end, I approached, but carefully. "Are you all right?" I asked. She looked up. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and a faint echo of sorrow slid into my consciousness. A heartbreak, a betrayal. But it was softer than before, as though my barrier shielded me from the worst. She shook her head. "It's nothing," she murmured. "Just life." I offered a tissue from my pocket, which she accepted with a small, grateful smile. Then I stepped away, mindful not to linger. As I walked into the night, I felt both relief and sadness. Relief that I could maintain my sense of self despite her sorrow. Sadness that I'd walled myself off from truly sharing another human being's pain. Was that the price of self-preservation? Maybe. Maybe it was necessary. I no longer needed to carry every burden as my own. Back in my hotel room, I poured a nightcap and gazed at the city lights outside the window. My phone buzzed with congratulatory messages, social media accolades, invitations to speak. The Book of Lived Coins was poised to become my biggest success, yet I felt hollow, almost detached from the whirlwind. Who am I now? I wondered. A man who once forgot himself in the consciousness of others. A writer channeling borrowed nightmares. A person who had glimpsed the fluid nature of the self and was forever changed? I recalled the final lines of my new novel, Detective Reed, standing alone in a silent apartment. In the vault of shared minds, we are all beggars of borrowed ghosts. It struck me that I, too, had become a beggar, living off fragments of others, forging them into stories. I sipped my drink, letting the city's glow blur my vision, until I sank into an uneasy sleep. Part 6. The Masks We Wear. A month passed after the Paris launch. The novel soared in sales, garnering rave reviews. Film rights discussions began, swirling with rumors of big-name directors. My publisher declared it a cultural touchstone, and yet, in my quiet hours, I felt unmoored. Celebrity and acclaim seemed meaningless compared to what I'd learned about the malleability of human identity. I began receiving emails from fans who claimed the novel spoke to them on a deep personal level, readers who believed they too had experienced echoes of other minds. Some letters praised the novel as a cautionary guide. Others demanded more details, suspecting I had insider knowledge of real empathic technology. The lines between fiction and reality blurred in the public discourse. Needing respite, I decided to visit my hometown, a sleepy coastal village where I hadn't set foot in decades. Perhaps returning to my origins would anchor me, remind me of who I was before all this began. The migraines, the empathic connections, the transformations. It felt like a lifetime ago. My hometown, however, was mostly unchanged. The same worn boardwalk, the same salt-stained fishing boats, even the same weather-beaten signs above local shops. I rented a small cottage by the shoreline, spending my days walking the beach, letting the rhythmic crash of waves soothe me. One afternoon, as I strolled along the water's edge, I spotted a boy building a sandcastle, accompanied by an older man, likely his grandfather. The boy's laughter rang out over the surf. I paused, struck by a pang of longing. I realized I'd grown terrified of ordinary human closeness, worried it might trigger another deep dive into someone else's experiences. Turning away, I studied the horizon. It stretched out, placid and infinite, reminding me of Leon's cosmic dread. A flash of memory surfaced: the drowned boy in Zurich, the heartbreak in Bern, the funeral in Lisbon. So many borrowed ghosts. Abruptly, I felt a wave of relief that none of them consumed me now. The gift, if that's what it was, seemed to have receded in intensity. For weeks, I'd had no major empathic incidents. Had it finally left me? That evening, I made a small fire on the beach, scribbling thoughts in my notebook by the flickering light. My pen moved aimlessly across the page, forming a question. What remains of me if the empathy fades? I recalled Dr. Parnell's words. We have no reason to believe it's permanent. Perhaps she was correct. Perhaps the effect was only temporary, a fleeting glitch in my neural wiring. If so, what did that say about all the revelations, the illusions of cosmic scale and overlapping identities? In the fire's glow, I remembered a line from Shakespeare. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. For me, it was more than just performance. It was infiltration, inhabitation. But now, maybe I was stepping off the stage entirely, returning to the audience. Did that make the experiences any less real? My solitude ended unexpectedly when my publicist called, insisting I do a final promotional push in New York. They're already calling it the book of the decade, she exclaimed. You can't vanish now. Reluctantly, I packed my things and left the peaceful beach, promising myself I'd return when the dust settled. In New York, the frenetic energy of the city grated on me after weeks of quiet. Billboards and digital screens flashed images of my novel's cover, a stylized silhouette of two overlapping faces. Interview after interview demanded to know, how did you conceive such a haunting premise? I repeated the same half-truths about personal introspection and hypothetical near-future scenarios. At a keynote event, a charismatic interviewer probed deeper. Your novel suggests that personal identity can be fragmented or even hijacked, he said. Do you see this as a metaphor for our digital age, where social media and technology allow us to live other lives vicariously? I tried to keep my voice steady. In some ways, yes. We already curate, edit, and project ourselves online. The next step, though, might be more literal than we think, and that's where it becomes frightening. In the audience, a woman raised her hand. If you could trade away one of your own memories for relief from pain or hardship, would you? The question hung in the air. I thought of my migraines, the Swiss clinic, the steep cost of my new ability. Once, I might have, I admitted. But now, I believe every experience, even the painful ones, forms who we are. Trading them away might mean losing pieces of ourselves we can't get back. After the event, throngs of readers lined up for autographs. For an hour, I signed books, forcing a polite smile. I kept my eyes lowered, but occasionally curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced up at her face. A flicker of sadness here, a spark of hope there, but my empathic sense remained dormant. I felt relief tinged with an unexpected sadness, as though I was now locked out of a realm of deeper connection, for better or worse. When the line ended, I noticed a familiar silhouette standing off to the side. Rebecca Johnson, the friend who had first suggested the Swiss clinic, approached with cautious excitement. "Eli, your book is extraordinary," she said, hugging me lightly. "The critics are calling you a visionary." I chuckled dryly, or a doomsayer, depending on who you ask. We found a quiet corner and caught up. She studied my face. "You seem changed," she said. "It's not just the success. You have a different aura about you." I mustered a half smile. "I suppose I've been through a lot. The migraines are gone, but new questions replace them." She frowned. "Questions about what?" I hesitated. "Questions about who I am," I finally said. She nodded, as though she understood more than I'd revealed. Then she said something that startled me. "I ran into Dr. Leitz recently at a conference in Geneva. He told me the clinic's experiment is being re-evaluated by international ethics boards. There are concerns that it could induce, let's just say, extreme psychological effects." My heart skipped. "Did he mention me?" Rebecca shook her head. "Only in passing. He said your case was unique." That night, in my hotel room, I wrestled with a storm of emotions. I felt like a living artifact of an unethical experiment that I never fully consented to. And yet, ironically, I also felt grateful. My migraines were gone, and the empathic experiences, though deeply unsettling, had opened creative floodgates. I wondered if I should publicly speak out about the clinic, warn others, but I knew how that might overshadow everything else, reducing my experiences to tabloid fodder. The following morning, I left New York. I had done my part for the publicity machine. Sales soared. The world was enthralled by a story about identity and empathy. Let them have it, I thought. I was done performing. I needed to reclaim my own narrative. I flew back to Europe, determined to revisit the quieter corners I'd found. For some reason, I thought of Leon in Bali, the monk who never looked at the stars. I emailed him, asking if he'd be open to seeing me again. He replied with an invitation. "Come, we can reflect together." So I did. Within a week, I was on a plane to Denpasar, drawn by the chance to find closure in the place where cosmic dread once nearly unmade a man. Lian greeted me at the temple gates with a warm smile. He seemed genuinely pleased to see me, as though time hadn't passed. We spent the next few days in tranquil meditation sessions, occasionally talking under the banyan trees. I told him about my novel, my empathic encounters, the fleeting sense that I could become someone else. He listened patiently, eyes lowered. "You've seen that identity is neither solid nor singular," he said. "This knowledge is both a curse and a gift. The real question is what you do with it now." I confessed my fear that without the empathic episodes, I'd lose my creative spark or become disconnected from the human condition. Lian chuckled. "Empathy isn't a superpower. It's a choice we make every day. Whether or not you feel others' minds, you can still choose compassion, still choose to see their humanity." After a long pause, he added, "The cosmos is vast and we are small. That can be terrifying, but it can also be liberating. You have glimpsed the dissolution of boundaries between self and other. Maybe that's the truth. We're all masks, illusions of separateness, covering a shared essence." His words resonated with something deep inside me. On my final day in Bali, Lian and I sat on a cliffside facing a fiery sunset. The sky was awash in oranges and purples. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw a gentle acceptance in his eyes. "Sometimes I still fear the stars," he said softly, "but I've learned that fear can be a doorway to understanding. Look if you wish." I tilted my head upward, scanning the emerging twilight. The first stars appeared, faint pinpricks of light. I felt no cosmic dread, only a quiet awe. Lian breathed steadily beside me. I wondered if my empathic link might open again, letting me feel his acceptance. But it didn't, and I realized I was okay with that. I didn't need to inhabit his mind to share a moment of peace. The next morning, I returned to Zurich, the city where my migraines had first driven me to desperation. I stood outside the NICA building, half expecting to march in, demand answers, confront Dr. Lights. But the revolving doors turned, oblivious to my presence. In the end, I decided I didn't need another confrontation. Nothing could change what had happened or restore me to my previous ignorance. Instead, I found an unassuming cafe nearby, the same cafe where I'd once encountered Helena, the woman in the red scarf. I ordered an espresso, sat down, and opened my notebook. The pages were blank, waiting for the next story. For a moment I stared at the crisp whiteness, feeling no particular rush to fill it. I sipped the espresso, letting its warmth ground me in the present. Stray thoughts about Helena, the boy in Zurich, Lian, Sophia, and the host of others who had peered into my soul or I into theirs flickered at the edges of my mind. A swirl of memories that weren't quite mine, yet they lived in me, shaped me. I lifted my pen and wrote a single line. Personal identity is a mask, woven from borrowed threads. I let the ink dry, closing the notebook with a calm exhalation. Perhaps that was my final answer, or perhaps just another partial truth in an endless search. But for now, it was enough. I stepped outside, taking in the busy Zurich street. People bustled by, each harboring a universe of thoughts, hopes, fears. I no longer felt compelled or cursed to absorb them. If I was still an empathic receptor, it was muted, under my control. Either way, the world went on, as it always does. I hailed a taxi to the airport. As we pulled away, I caught my reflection in the car window. My face looked older, wearier, but somehow lighter. In the reflection, I saw echoes of a detective, a mother, a drowning child, an astrophysicist, a monk, a woman named Sophia, and countless others. They were all part of me, masks I wore and then set aside. Or maybe they'd never left. Either way, I realized I wasn't afraid of them anymore. On the flight home, I slept deeply for the first time in years, lulled by the hum of the engines. Occasionally, I dreamed of stars, blank books, and infinite seas. But in the morning light, as the plane descended, I felt only my own heartbeat. The migraines were gone. The unstoppable empathy was gone or diminished. And I, Eli Weston, famed novelist, ephemeral collection of borrowed experiences, felt at peace. Months later, I would walk into a library and see the book of lived coins displayed prominently. I'd watch strangers pick it up, flip through its pages, and carry it to the checkout counter with curiosity in their eyes. They wouldn't know how much of it was real, how much was gleaned from a gift I never asked for, nor would they know how close I came to losing myself in the swirling undertow of other minds. But perhaps, if they read closely, they'd catch a glimmer of the truth, that behind every mask lies another mask, and behind every story, another deeper story. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes us human. And so I offer this final reflection to you, dear reader. If you could have been someone else, might you already be? The boundaries we cherish between self and other are as thin as pages in a book, ready to be turned, rewritten, or, in rare cases, lived by another. In that fragile space, we discover not only the illusions that sustain our sense of identity, but also the profound empathy that can unite us all if we dare to look behind our masks. Thus ends my confession. I am still Eli Weston, or so I choose to believe. The migraines never returned, and the empathic deluge subsided to a soft murmur. Life goes on, calm yet forever changed. And in the quiet moments, I sometimes wonder, do I miss it? The shock of stepping into another's mind, the raw authenticity of their memories. The answer, as with most truths in life, remains both yes and no. There are days I feel nostalgic for that heightened state of connection, for the creative fire it ignited. Other days I'm grateful for the return of boundaries, for the safety of being myself. Ultimately, I've come to accept that identity, like the entire cosmos, is fluid, shifting with each new experience. The mask you wear today may differ from the one you wear tomorrow or the one you wore a year ago, and that's okay. If there's a lesson to be gleaned, it is this. Be gentle with the stranger you meet, for you carry their potential within you. Be gentle with yourself, for you are more fleeting and vast than you know. And with that, I close my tale. The rest is up to you. How you read it, how you interpret it, and how you carry it into your own life. Remember, your mind, too, is a stage. And sometimes, the next character waiting in the wings might just be you, or someone else you could have been.